Hello friends, for today's video we're back with another from readers, and if you're new, the idea behind this video series is that I have a specific question or prompt over on my community tab and my Patreon where I ask all of you about a given topic and then we go really in depth into said topic, and today's happens to be all about Goodreads and the Goodreads Choice Award nominees. The specific prompt stated, what are some things about Goodreads and the Goodreads Choice Awards that you wish would change? What things would you like more of? And what would you like less of? As always, I'm going to start with patron responses. I do always go through these, so if you ever want to guarantee that your response gets read, I will have my Patreon link down below, and then we'll jump into the community tab responses. I have a feeling that I already can kind of guess what some of the responses are going to be, but Goodreads has made some changes in recent years, at least to the awards, that I think a lot of us were hoping for. Doesn't mean that we're entirely satisfied. I think there are a lot of things that we wish would still change. So I do look forward to seeing your responses about those. As far as Goodreads as a whole, I feel that the app and the website, they are so different depending on what device you're using and whether you're using the app or if you're just going to the website. I think information can be really hard to find. It's not the easiest to navigate. And sometimes if I'm looking for an answer to something, rather than actually searching somehow within Goodreads, I often have to go outside of Goodreads, ask the question in some kind of search engine, and then I can find the answer within Goodreads by following a link, which feels like such a roundabout, unnecessary way to get information that should just be supplied easily and should be easily searchable. But I digress. We're going to jump into your responses. The first one says, in general for Goodreads, and I know I'm not the only one who wants this, I just really want half stars. They already have the foundation there, just code it in, please, which yes, I very much agree. I don't really do star ratings just because I feel like there's so much complexity that goes into discussing books, and I prefer to really get into the meat of things. Sometimes I feel like a star rating can be slightly distracting from a reviewer angle if I'm trying to deliver information to all of you about a book. But as far as a record keeping for yourself, or if you are somebody who likes to express your thoughts via star ratings, yeah, I feel like not having half stars is kind of ridiculous at this point, especially when competitive apps do provide half star options. I'm kind of surprised that Goodreads still hasn't developed that. People have been asking for that for years. So yeah, you're definitely correct in saying that you're not the only one that wants that. I think most people do. And if you look at their breakdown of what each star rating means, it's a pretty big jump from one star to the next. I just think for sure half stars, but I feel like quarter stars. Even people sometimes would like to use those. Continuing on though with the same individual's response, for the Choice Awards, oof. I can see the benefits of it. I mostly read science fiction, fantasy, and seldom branch out into different genres. However, over the past year or so, I've been trying to make an effort to read other genres. It's pretty overwhelming for me to go into a new genre, so I've used the Choice Awards as a starting point. Wouldn't say it's been too successful for me, but again, it's just a starting point. That being said, I do hate that it's a popularity contest. I'm not 100% sure if the voting phase is still the same, as I haven't voted and participated in it in a number of years, but I think that instead of Goodreads generating the list based on the popular books, people should just be able to submit a book they think should win from the start, and then maybe have a second phase of submissions if they need more books or something. Obviously, it's still going to be a popularity contest, which I'm not expecting to change. But I know, Elliot, in one of your previous Goodreads videos, you mentioned Hunger of the Gods not being in the awards. So maybe by doing this submission process from the start, we would have seen it. Or who knows, we could end up getting books that might not be deemed, quote, popular by Goodreads standards on the list. I don't think I explained this well, but I just don't think that the current state of the awards is great. If I understand correctly, and I do feel like Goodreads is a little ambiguous about the Choice Award nominees, but I think that part of the placement comes from how many people have shelved a book as want to read or something like that, which in the case of something like a sequel, because Shadow of the Gods, I did go back and check, because you are correct, I did mention that Hunger of the Gods wasn't there in a previous Goodreads video, but Shadow of the Gods was, and I know this because of a different Goodreads video that I've recently done. So Shadow of the Gods was there the year it came out, and then Hunger of the Gods was not, and I wouldn't say it's because it sort of dropped in quality or anything like that. I think that if I'm correct about the shelving being a component, then I wonder if people who were fans of Shadow of the Gods, they would have known that Hunger of the Gods was going to be coming out. They might not have thought to shelve it, and as a result, it didn't appear on the list. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe that year there was just better books, but I don't really feel like that's what it comes down to, and also that's subjective, so there's no way to be able to determine that for sure. But I do think that sequels can be tricky. I've said for a long time, I wish there was some kind of solution that had something for sequels, and I recognize that this could get really messy because do you have a whole separate area for sequels for every genre, or do you just do like an entire category for sequels, kind of like how they have an entire category for debut? I mean, maybe. I think it would ultimately end up being mostly fantasy anyway, because a lot of fantasy stories are sequels. That didn't make any sense, sorry. A lot of fantasy stories are series, which then inevitably means there are going to be sequels, whereas other genres, maybe you don't find that series are as woven into the sort of like blueprint that is followed. I don't know. I think that could work, and then it wouldn't be like the sequel is competing necessarily with other things within its own category. I also think another component to this is how many people of certain genres or certain subgenres even use Goodreads in that way. Because I think certain readers, and actually I think certain readers of certain genres maybe use, I would love a breakdown of the demographics and the who uses what and what they read and things like that. But I do kind of wonder if that particular story that we're using as an example, the Bloodsworn Saga, I just wonder if the readers of that series, when John Gwynne was first announcing Shadow of the Gods, if they were like, oh my gosh, I can't wait. So like maybe they did shelve it as a reminder, and then they're not necessarily the types to continuously shelve things in that series, whereas maybe people who are huge Sarah J. Maas fans or something would be more likely to shelve. I don't know. I think that could be a reason why. I think the submission process could get also complicated. Doesn't mean that it can't be done. There used to be a submission portion that I think they took out. It wasn't entirely how they built their nominees, but I think it was its own thing, and I think they got rid of that. So sadly, I think if anything, they're going in the opposite direction of what you would like. I think they're kind of trying to remove the user participation in even coming up with the nominees list. But it would be kind of cool if they could have that as well. Next up, you know what I wish? That Goodreads had a more sophisticated evaluation and rating system, something nuanced enough that users could understand what criteria different readers use for star ratings. For me, the whole star thing gets absurd. I recently read and really liked Gideon the Ninth. So do I give it 5 stars? The way I also would give War and Peace 5 stars? That doesn't seem to do justice to what either book does for me. They are so different and aim at such different things. What good does it do to treat them like they are commodities of equal value along the same spectrum? Perhaps ratings could be subdivided to reflect differences in time, scope, sheer entertainment value versus universality, lightness versus heaviness, etc. Of course, you could say that the way to convey this is to write a review, but many books have more reviews than anyone will bother to read, and I certainly don't always have time or inclination to write one. Failing a better rating system, couldn't they at least make half-star gradations available? Yeah, so repeating that same sentiment of at least half stars would be nice. I think that there are certain apps where they allow you to, specify kind of in the way that you're discussing the things that ended up working for you and why. But it would be nice if Goodreads at least had some additional things, like maybe you thought the characterization was great and you thought that the plot was great, but that the writing was just okay, the entertainment was lower. I do think that could get tricky, and I think that on the back end that maybe that would involve way more for the tech side of things than I really am aware of. But at the very least, as we kind of said with the first response, at least some kind of half-star rating would be nice. After that, I'm coming at this much more as a writer than a reader, but Goodreads has been trending for a long time toward being very commodified. It used to be an avenue for finding a genuinely good read, especially of lesser-known authors, but now it's hardly distinguishable from the Amazon review section. The ratings and commentary are overly generous toward massive popular books that we all sort of know aren't actually that good, so I honestly don't even know what the purpose of it is anymore, but that might just be me. And then there is a response. This is so true. Current average rating for Fourth Wing is 4.57. Current average rating for Moby Dick is 3.55, or if you prefer The Grace of Kings, 3.79. Both of those are also bested by Lightlark, which is 3.84. Nothing wrong with people liking what they like, but surely something is askew. I think that's really funny. There is one more response, so I'll read that before I give my thoughts on this. A friend of mine worked with a publicity firm when she published her book, and they worked with Goodreads in a variety of ways. So I can at least say that it's not just a benign reviews platform, it's actively seen as a publicity arm in the publishing industry. I think a lot of readers still perceive it as a spontaneous outgrowth of other readers' experiences, so it's still quite trusted even though that's no longer entirely true. First off, I just want to say I really like how you worded that. It's still, readers still perceive it as a spontaneous outgrowth of other readers' experiences. I like that a lot. So just commending how you articulated your thought there. I really like that. I do agree with the general idea that average ratings seem like they're all over the place. I think this is in part because, kind of going again to who uses Goodreads, I do find certain genres and certain age ranges are rated very differently. So I actually have found, generally speaking, and this is anecdotal, so I don't have in-depth stats on all of this, but I have noticed just over the years that fantasy romance and adult fantasy tends to kind of skew on the high end. And I actually would say young adult tends to get decently low ratings in comparison. Not necessarily that they are low overall. And I think that part of this is because people who use Goodreads, from what I can tell, are usually adults. Adults who pick up young adult works sometimes are very aware that young adult is not necessarily having the target demographic be them, meaning the adult who is using Goodreads and picking up a young adult book. However, while some adults are aware I'm not the target demographic, so I'm not going to be upset at this young adult book that is centering experiences of young people a little bit more than the experiences that I have right now. Maybe also it's more accessible. Maybe I've seen some of this before, but it's an introduction for newer readers into these fantasy worlds and magic systems and complex themes. And so I'm going to go into it recognizing that it's different, even though that's true and there are readers that are like that. There are also readers that go into YA and they expect it to be the same. And this doesn't mean like in quality. That's not what I mean whatsoever. I just mean literally they expect it to be the same in how it tells the story, how the writing is done, how it delivers the thoughts of the characters, how the characters behave. There's an expectation for it to be like the works that are trying to center adult experiences. And I think that is unfair, and I think sometimes the average rating shows that. I think another example, which perhaps from my perspective, I think it can be exaggerated online as far as the expectations that some people have, but I do know it's true to at least some degree. I do know that sometimes adults who like reading romance and fantasy romance will pick up a young adult book, and then they will be disappointed because there isn't that much spice, or the scenes have their fade to black scenes, or sometimes they'll be like, I mean, it was just kind of cutesy, so I don't know, it wasn't really for me. And then they'll rate it because maybe their personal rating system is based off of just like, how much did I like this? Which there's not anything evil about doing that. If you purely use the rating system as a means of record keeping for yourself, then that's fine. But the average rating is going to reflect what the average is. So if a lot of people are doing that, then it's going to the point that's being made by, I think, the both of you, it's going to kind of skew things. That's just one example. Other genres, I think the readers have very different expectations, and I think maybe they're looking at it less from an entertainment perspective, and they might be looking at it from like, what's the quality of the writing? I know a lot of literary works. Some of it is a lot of sort of nods to other things that maybe would go over people's heads if they are just dipping their toes into those works. So I think there's a lot that goes into why the ratings feel so different from one book to the next or one genre to the next. But it would be nice if there was a way that we could maybe still have that rating system, but we didn't take it so seriously, and the app itself found ways to build in a means of reflecting people's thoughts that are a little bit more in depth. without, as was said earlier, the need to write a super in-depth long review. Next up, it's small but annoying, multiple versions of a book on Goodreads. So then it's hard to know if you're reading all the reviews or just a handful. I agree. This is a response. Different editions and ISBNs need to somehow be consolidated or connected under the same story or work. I have seen this before, especially when books end up getting, like, as an example, I'm almost positive that Six of Crows has its own listing, Crooked Kingdom has its own listing, and then the box set of both of them has its own listing. What? Why? I don't need the box set. I kind of feel like, I know I'm going a little off track here, but I know that on NetGalley now, if I'm trying to look into anticipated releases, that occasionally, and I think poked fun at it in one of my anticipated releases videos, but sometimes instead of just giving me the synopsis, it'll be like, coming in an edition that has foiled edges, and you're just like, okay, what's the book about? Point that was made earlier about how Goodreads is becoming more of a sales thing as opposed to a way for people to discover books and express their thoughts on books and readers to just generally come together. Instead of it being that, it's turned into an extension of Amazon, it feels, which it kind of is. And as a result, it just kind of seems like everything is centered on selling. And so to see that a little bit in NetGalley, I'm like, no, can you not do that either? I mean, I get wanting to make people aware that something is going to have a nice edition, but that's kind of not necessary. And then here, to your point, I feel like when you have all these different listings, it can kind of come across like you're just trying to remind people that there's another edition out there that they might want to buy. That might be reading into it a little too much. Maybe it's just a matter of like the website's kind of messy and that's that. It's not the most organized. I do like, though, when you can search the foreign editions or editions in other languages, because I find it's really fun to see what different editions from different countries look like. That I do think is kind of fun. So part of me is like, am I being hypocritical? Because sometimes the other editions might still be in English if we're using that as the example of the language. Sometimes there might be a US version, but if then there's a version from another country and it happens to also be English, then I'm excited about getting to see the different looks. Anyway, it's just messy. I think that's the main point. It can be messy, and it needs to decide what it wants to be. Does it want to sell stuff, or does it want to be a community-based app and website? Now switching to the responses over on the community tab. The first one I really like. It says, Goodreads in general needs to have a DNF option. The Choice Awards would really benefit from more diversity. I like that they added romantasy so that it isn't taking over fantasy. I don't like that they allow multiple books by the same author as options within one category and mainly choose only big name authors. There are many popular authors with high ratings that were missing last year. They could easily incorporate more diverse options. Also, they should bring back graphic novels, comics, manga, as well as middle grade and children's books. So I don't know that I need to expand too much on the first two. I'll just say, yes, a Goodreads option. A Goodreads option? No. A DNF option on Goodreads. 100% I agree. That would be awesome. Because some people will DNF something and then they just give it 1 star, but they're not actually mad at the book and they don't think the book was bad. I've seen some people that are like, oh, okay, maybe you don't, because maybe you didn't watch this video. I did a video recently talking about the fact that series continuations, where there's like an original completed trilogy as an example, or series in general, and then there's a continuation that maybe follows different characters, but characters from the original series show up, those sorts of things. Sometimes publishing is not the clearest when the first book in the new series comes out about whether it's part of the same world, and it can result in people being spoiled. I'll have the video I did where I go more in depth about that topic in the description bar, but point is that when I picked up a book that it turned out to be within this situation, I was like, oh shoot, it's part of the same world as this other series, and now I kind of got spoiled. So then I was curious, I'm like, are other people aware of this? So I went to Goodreads to see if other people had also experienced the same thing. And I'm almost positive that somebody left a 1-star review because they said, oh shoot, I didn't realize this was part of the same world, so I'm going to have to come back to this one. And I'm like, well, it's not 1 star. You know what I mean? I feel like that doesn't really indicate quality. I think you could have just not given it a star and said the same thing. You could still write the review. So it kind of makes me a little sad that they didn't. I feel like the leaving a review or an explanation without a star rating is the closest thing people have to DNFing. I like how I said I wasn't going to elaborate much, and now I'm elaborating on this first point. I agree. That's my statement. I agree. There needs to be, the 1 through 5 stars, half to quarter options also would be great. And then just like a DNF button. That would be wonderful. And if people are curious why you DNF'd, you can leave more of your thoughts. For the second part about more diversity, yes. I think that part of it is just how the Goodreads Choice Award nominees even establishes which books are going to be nominated, because it's so much of a popularity contest, and because a lot of the things that get read and a lot of the things that get to be popular and that have a lot of funding even before the book's even out, it comes down to who's an author that's already well established, who's an author that's already popular, and then if that author comps for another series, then there's going to be parallels likely between those, and then you just sort of end up having this cycle of things all feeling really similar, and then those being the things that get nominated. And then a lot of the stuff that's really unique, really different, that's centering experiences that don't tend to be what the focus is on typically within various genres, those get kind of left behind. I do feel like this is why it's really good to incorporate indie into reading, because I do feel like indie does avoid some of these traps that traditional publishing can accidentally or sometimes maybe like just inadvertently perpetuates. But indie books, I think, can be free of the restrictions that traditional publishing places on them. And I think it would be cool if we had a category for indie releases within the Goodreads nominees. I know that, similar to what I was saying about sequels, does that mean that you would have indie for every category? Or do you just have an indie option and then books from all kinds of genres can show up? I don't know. I still think you would end up having the popular indie books being the ones that get nominated, and often the popular ones are the ones where people have YouTube channels or large social media platforms, and the people that are just kind of in the trenches will say they maybe wouldn't get the recognition. So there'd still be problems with it, but it would be cool to have that be an option. And then also, your last point about graphic novels, manga, comics. Yeah, I think that if I had to take a guess, part of why maybe they took it down is because maybe they felt like a single manga volume, it was weird to have that in competition with something else. Or maybe it's because I just feel like they didn't get enough votes in those categories, but I definitely would like it if they included those again. I also just think that it sort of acts as though those types of stories don't have impact. It sort of like delegitimizes the significance of stories told within those forms, and that's disappointing to me. Maybe that's not the message other people take away, but I don't know. Like I have two nieces that I have two nieces who love to read, one of whom reads books and the other one who primarily picks up manga. And I don't know, I just think about like, what if they started to get excited about like, oh, I want to see what comes out. I want to vote. Like, the idea of that is cute, but the idea that the two of them, like, one would get to vote and then the other one who maybe got to vote before wouldn't be able to vote now because they dropped the manga, that would make me kind of sad. Moving on, next up we have, I only have one for Goodreads in general. Please stop allowing reviews and ratings before the book's release date. This impacts the general rating and gives false perception to those who rely on it to choose what to read or not. It would also impact the choice of award nominees, especially when it's books only just released. I was going to mention something that was already said in the replies to this, which is that it makes sense if it's an ARC review. And the first comment actually was talking about how they like doing book of the month. This isn't sponsored, they just happen to mention that they like doing book of the month. And if they're deciding on a book they think sounds interesting, that it's helpful to then be able to go to Goodreads and see ARC reviews. And I completely agree. I think in that scenario, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's unfortunate when people start rating things before they're out. I go kind of back and forth on this. So some people will give a rating because from the, once again, personal record keeping and just in general personal experience of Goodreads, they have fun giving it the rating they think that they'll like. It's like a prediction. I'm predicting that I'm going to feel 3 stars for this book, or I'm predicting this is going to be a 5-star read. And then when they actually pick it up, then they go back and they adjust based off of whether they liked it or didn't like it. And it'd be kind of fun. I just don't love, though, giving a book a star rating before you've read it. Like, I get that you might want to do predictions, but as somebody who writes a bunch of stuff down in notebooks, I'm like, you can just write it down. But then, I don't know, on the flip side, I'm kind of like, it's not the biggest deal in the world. I think that that's the problem with Goodreads for me at this point, and I should say that's the problem with me with Goodreads at this point, is I'm like, you know that moment from, that's kind of like built into the zeitgeist of a certain generation, of one of the Kardashians telling the other, like, because I think it's Kim who's crying because her diamond earring fell into the ocean, and the other one's like, people are dying, right? Or like starving or something serious. That's kind of like how I feel, where I'm just like, oh yeah, I totally agree. Like, why would you rate something before it's out? And then I'm like, I don't know, who cares? And I feel like that's not fair, because the point is that we're trying to talk about ways it could be better. I might just be in one of those headspaces right now where I'm like, there's so many terrible things in the world, and I'm talking about Goodreads. But that got a little existential dread-y, so let's move on. The next person said flexible ratings systems with half stars. Yeah. As far as I'm aware, this is the next comment. Goodreads are never going to bother updating the app or site again, so this feels a little pointless. Oh, I feel like you're reflecting a little bit my feelings. Anyway, the list of things missing from their site was so long that I switched to Storygraph 3 years ago and haven't looked back. They are constantly making improvements and engage so well with their user base for feedback, updates, etc. The downside is that Storygraph isn't as useful for creators at the moment. The social aspect isn't as strong, and it doesn't have lists/many search parameters to base content on. I'm going to be honest. I feel like the searches on Goodreads oftentimes aren't that helpful. If I'm trying to look something up and then a Goodreads list comes up, sometimes I'll click on it and the list will not be very comprehensive. So I'm just kind of like, oh, well, okay, that wasn't very helpful. Or it'll be like so long, and I feel like almost unhelpful, because anything that could even slightly fit within whatever the prompt is of the list, people will include that. And I'm like, it's too broad now, and I don't feel like it's very helpful. So I don't really use Goodreads lists. I just prefer to make lists myself. I do recognize it would be nice if Goodreads had that, and Storygraph is definitely, I think, killing it on a lot of fronts. It is too bad that it doesn't have that, but I kind of respect that it feels like currently Storygraph is sort of focusing on how they can make the user experience better, and they're constantly making those improvements, and they're not worried about trying to be something that they're not, or trying to be overly social, because I do feel like, social media is what it is, and it exists, and if we want to go to be more social, we have those options in other apps. Whereas I like that Storygraph is basically like, we're here to have people have a better experience discovering what they like. Because if you don't know Storygraph, because my husband kind of uses Storygraph, it's cool in that it'll show you your stats, and it will be pretty specific. Like, one of his, I can't remember the exact categorization, but the way it pinned down exactly what my husband likes, and he was like, wow, okay, I guess I'm pretty edgy with what I read, and I thought that was really amusing. But that can be really helpful, because then you can see what you gravitate toward. Maybe you thought you were reading way more of something and you realize you weren't, because it keeps really good track. So I think from a keeping track perspective, a reviewing space, and a means of I'm just using this for the thing I keep saying, which is record keeping, I feel like Storygraph is doing a really great job of that. I don't know that it ever will become more social, but Goodreads, I'm like, I feel like the social element to some degree, it's not enraging only, but I do feel like sometimes it just turns into somebody will leave a review and then somebody will reply and get upset. And oh my gosh, on that note, I have to tell you, I saw the funniest exchange. It's not really funny, it's rude. But somebody was basically talking about how they didn't like this one book. If I can find the screenshots, because I took screenshots of this exchange, because I found it so stupid. But there was an exchange where somebody was like, I didn't like this book and here's why. And then this other person replied and was just so upset, and they were just belittling. And then they left their own review where they were clearly referencing the negative review. So their positive review was prompted by the negative review. It wasn't prompted because they loved the book that much, let's be real. But they then are just like obviously referencing this other person's review. And that's what I mean by sometimes it can feel enraging, where you're just like, dude, what did you think of the book? Say what you thought of the book and then move on. Maybe collectively you've heard some people, they've said certain things about the book, and maybe you might want to address, like, I know a lot of people have brought attention to XYZ fill in the blank thing, and I just want to provide my thoughts on that. Okay, that's fine. But just like not subtly at all being like, well, some people will say that this is actually a lesser version of this, and those people are wrong, and you're just like, okay. So, you know, I don't know. I guess where I'm going with this is I don't know if I'm totally upset at the idea of Storygraph not being overly social. Moving on. Next response has multiple things that have stated, so we'll go through each of them. The first one says, make changing editions of a book easier for app. I still haven't found a way to do it, so for me, it's non-existing. 2, add a DNF. Nice. 3, make it impossible to rate a book without it being published yet. We did also kind of go into that. 4, can't vote on Goodreads awards without having read the book. I agree with that. And then 5, 0 stars and half stars should exist. Because we've talked about a fair amount of these other things, I'm going to focus on the idea of voting when you haven't yet read the book. I know that in some ways there's no real ability to confirm a person has read the book unless they get to a point where you have to prove you've purchased it or something, which I think that would become a nightmare, and that would be super annoying, especially if you are somebody who uses the library a lot. So I think that the proving that you read it thing would be difficult. I think maybe they could have the additional step of it has to be on your read shelf and you have to have rated it or reviewed it or something. But I feel like people could easily, if they're willing to vote for something they haven't read, then I think that extra potential step, all they could do would just be like, 5 stars. And then they could go from rating it 5 stars to then voting. So I don't really know how they would get to a point where they could have it be something a person proves. But I agree that it would be nice if there was a way to keep that from happening. Oh, and on that note, the next one actually is talking about this very thing. I wish there was somehow a way to program the voting so that you can only vote for a book that you have read. I know someone can just go and claim they read a book even if they actually didn't, so this idea isn't perfect, but maybe this extra step of having to go into your books, mark it as read in order to vote, would help decrease the number of votes that people are casting on only name/title recognition. As well, people wouldn't be able to vote if they didn't read anything in a particular category. Of course, more popular books will still have more votes, but perhaps, sorry, Luna just sat down and grumbled if you heard that, but perhaps now I can't talk because I'm distracted because she's cute, but perhaps this could help the vote count be more realistic. As well, I would like it if the votes were reset at the beginning of the second round instead of accumulative. I was thinking about this as I was reading your comment, so wow, you just really captured a lot of what was in my head. Yes, so if you don't know, and I very stupidly didn't notice this one year, and then I was like kind of embarrassed. When they do rounds of voting, they have the first round of voting, and then that sort of narrows it down, and they have a next set that you vote on. And then at the end, when they show you the top books of that year, understandably, the book that got the most votes is going to be first place, regardless of it being accumulative. But then when you're looking at second place, third place, fourth place, fifth place, it looks like they got so many more votes than the ones that end up later on the list. And I think it would be a more accurate representation of the voting if they did exactly what you're saying, or if they also kind of had votes from round 1 and then votes from round 2 or something like that. I think that would be helpful. And it would be kind of interesting to see, based off of the differences, where maybe initially the books, let's say there's, a top 10. Then the book that ended up in 8th place, maybe it actually in the first round had the second most amount of votes. But then after certain books that didn't end up in the top 10 were gone, then the people that had voted for those started voting for other things. And then that's what made the book go down to 8th place, and then other things went above it. That would be kind of interesting to see. Maybe other people don't care. I don't know. But I think that would be kind of cool. Oh, Library of a Viking. Hi. How about literally just updating what the website looks like? It seriously looks like a website that hasn't been updated in 10 years. So ugly. Vomiting emoji. I agree. But I will say I'm kind of picky about the way things look in general. Like Discord. I hate Discord. I don't like going on Discord because to me, I understand that part of the aesthetic of Discord, and I won't go on a whole long thing about it because that's not what this video is about, but part of the whole idea is that it feels like message boards of back in the day. Like that's kind of, I'm summarizing that poorly, but I understand there is an intention behind the look. I just don't like the look and it keeps me from using it. And Goodreads, I feel like that's part of it as well. It's not satisfying. I kind of was saying this at the beginning. Just navigating the site, Luna agrees completely. Just trying to navigate the site initially, as soon as you log in, you're like, oh, never mind. After that, they need a section that is separate for all my friends' updates. I don't always need to know what someone wants to read. They also need to give us half stars. Like, honestly. Yeah. As far as the updates about your friends, I have notifications turned off on everything. I have mentioned before that I have so many unread messages. I don't remember what the amount was the last time I let you all know. I think it was like over 13,000. And I'm pretty close to 14,500 now unread emails. So I have 403 text messages that are unread. Although to be fair, a lot of them were the like plethora of political texts that we were getting leading up to our election. And then I have 214 missed calls. I just have so many notifications that I can't keep up. So I have notifications turned off on all of my apps. So I don't even think about the notification element of Goodreads. So I'm glad that you brought this up. And yeah, I think that would be nice. But I guess I might also extend to you. You can just turn off the notifications on Goodreads. But I get where maybe you want certain notifications. So if there was a way to filter that I can see being very, very helpful. Regarding the Choice Awards, it depends on if they want to get taken seriously, because for that to happen, they would need to stop making it a popularity contest, because as all the previous editions and every other popularity contest have shown, that rarely ends with the good stuff winning. While I don't entirely disagree, I also will add that is subjective, which I know you know. I just, I think a lot of you know, I don't love perpetuating certain ideas of like, this is objectively great quality literature, and then this is like fluffy dumb for the masses stuff. And I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm probably being overly cautious about not perpetuating that concept, but I'd rather be overly careful and maybe lean into annoying territory than not say anything. Anyway, apart from that, I would mostly use it to stay informed about new releases. So what I would like them to have is a weekly list of new books like Locus Magazine has, only including all the books Locus hasn't. I think they do have a new this week option on their homepage or something. And I didn't even know this until I was trying to look up when the Goodreads Choice Award nominees were happening, which they need to make known ahead of time. It irritates me that you pretty much don't know until the week that they're happening. I don't know if that irritates anyone else, but as somebody who likes to keep up with that kind of stuff, and I also plan things way in advance, and I bulk film, and I like knowing when things are going to happen. But anyway, the point is, when I was looking for the Goodreads Choice Award dates, I think they do have a list of things that are out that week. So there's that. But I will say I think the only thing I use Goodreads for at this point mostly is to check the release dates. Because sometimes the release dates on NetGalley or the release dates that were listed on somebody's, like sometimes there will be a list of like the top books coming out in whatever year you're in. And when you look at that list, it'll be made at the beginning of the year, and then sometimes books, the projected release date changes. So sometimes I'll go to Goodreads to see the difference between whatever was listed as there versus what it's now listed as on Goodreads. And that's about it. I don't really go on Goodreads for anything else. So I would recommend, if you want to see more of what's coming out, maybe check, and I understand this is a little bit of an inconvenience, but if you have certain publishers that you tend to gravitate toward, A lot of times publishers on their websites will tell you what's coming out. You can also on NetGalley, even if you don't want to request ARCs, you can still use NetGalley to search for titles, and you can, I think, even search specifically by publisher. And then you can also, there's a number of other ways you can search for things as well. So while I agree that Goodreads could be better and they could have the things that are being released in a way that's more concise and easily found, if you are looking for that information and you're finding Goodreads isn't supplying it very well, then maybe checking out NetGalley and publisher websites would help. Next up, I'd personally like them to fix the social media aspect of their website, namely the homepage. Let us filter what kind of content we see on our homepages. I like seeing reviews and what people want to read. I don't need to know that people read 2 pages of their book today or liked some random person's comment. That said, I am part of the problem because I update my reading process too, and that probably pops up on my friends' feeds too. Yeah, wow. The idea of using Goodreads as literally social media is just not a thing I've ever done, really. So it is interesting. I'm glad that this is being brought up multiple times because it is not something I would have ever thought to present. And this is why I like doing these videos, because I like getting to see your perspectives on things, and because I feel like I talk at all of you a lot, and I'm like, I want to balance the scales just a tiny bit. Moving on, more flexibility in the rating system, plus an optimization for books in other languages than English. That's a great idea. I don't really need to add to that because you summed it up really well. Completely agree. That would be fantastic. Next up, I like how they do digest emails and lists of new monthly releases. Okay, so maybe what you're saying here helps the comment that was left before, because I don't think I realized that. Especially for genres like lit fic that people don't talk about as much on BookTube. I actually wish they do it weekly. I wish there was a way, or an easier one if it currently exists, for reviewers to only apply their reviews to the format they read. It counts against the physical format if reviewers downrate a book because they didn't like the audio narrator. Completely agree with all of this. Or because the writing or story were confusing in audio format. That shouldn't be part of the review for the physical format of the book, just like how I can't in good faith specifically review the audio version if I haven't listened to it and only read it physically. I really appreciate everything that was stated here, and I for myself have noted that sometimes certain narrators, because I do like immersion reading and I do like audiobooks, but occasionally I get a narrator that I just am finding is really irritating me, or the way that they're bringing a certain character to life, if I really sit back and think on it, I realize the dialogue isn't the problem. It's the way that the narrator is delivering it, and that feels unfair to the book. So I like the idea of being able to rate the audiobooks separate. And I think to our conversation earlier about different editions, I think this would be one that most people would be completely fine with, because the pros outweigh the cons. The cons being like, it can be a little confusing for half a second if you're accidentally reviewing the audiobook and then you realize like, oh, whoops, I thought that was the physical. But I feel like most people know how to use an app well enough, and that's a mistake that probably wouldn't happen that often. But I think it would be really, really fascinating to look at the two and compare and see how often when somebody listens to the audiobook, if the rating is higher than if they just read the physical. Even though I'd like to believe that most of us are capable of being able to tell whether we liked a story or not, regardless of the audiobook narrator, as somebody who loves Age of Madness, and many of us know Stephen Pacey is pretty much like the greatest narrator for fantasy, I wonder if he hadn't narrated Joe Abercrombie's works, or if he did and we had those separate categories of just listen to it on audio versus just read it physically, I do think it would be really fascinating to compare those numbers. We'll go ahead and stop there for today. If you are interested in seeing more of the responses, I'll have the actual post linked in the description bar down below. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, whether that be adding to some of the things that were mentioned here, or just in general bringing up things that haven't been mentioned just yet, feel free to do so. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you're interested in more From Readers style of videos, I'll have the playlist linked. Like I said, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.
Oh, do you have zoomies? Do you have zoomies?